A simple woman was mocked for bringing a frost-covered bolt-action rifle to the most advanced Arctic shooting complex in North America. Her thrift store coat drew stares, her civilian ID drew whispers, and her silence drew contempt. They said she was here by mistake, a scheduling glitch, or maybe a social experiment. When she adjusted her gloves instead of her scope, a junior officer laughed out loud. Others joined in, filming her from behind polished bipods and carbon fiber stocks. The live stream, titled Cosplay Shooter, trended for 15 minutes before the first shot cracked. A steel target at 1,000 meters rang like a bell. The second shot tore through the first. The third sealed a triangle smaller than a silver dollar. Nobody cheered. The same officer who had corrected her stance now stood completely still, unable to reconcile the footage on his screen with the woman beside him. Then, a quiet voice from the Defense Department confirmed her name, her history, and her legacy. The optics system they all trained on bore her signature, built for snipers in terrain colder than this. No one spoke. No one dared. And Reagan Brooks, still wrapped in the same patched coat, stood up from the snow without a word. Snow Ridge Tactical Range sat high above the tree line, where white wind carved through concrete and steel. The facility spanned a frozen ridge, its shooting lanes buried under a crust of wind-polished snow. Towering mountains walled in the range from all sides, their blue shadows deepening with every passing hour. Steel targets were pinned in drifts as hard as ice, the farthest stretching to the base of a ridge 1,000 meters away. Every rifle on the benches gleamed matte black carbon, engraved nameplates, silent stabilizers. The shooters matched high-performance bodies in cold-weather uniforms stamped with elite emblems, movements practiced and precise. They belonged here. Reagan Brooks did not. She stepped from a transport sled wearing a faded green parka stitched at the elbows, canvas snow pants too old for any current regulation, and scuffed boots with a cracked toe. Her rifle case was strapped to her back with a canvas belt. Her ID badge, clipped to her shoulder, read Civilian Observer in faded blue print. As she approached the sign-in table, the first wave of stillness passed over the range. Not silence, just adjustment. Eyes tracking without welcome. One of the range marshals leaned toward another, speaking low. A third staff member tapped something on a tablet and muttered, "Audit slot mix-up." A tall female officer with sleek goggles and a perfect jawline looked Reagan up and down before speaking. "That... her..." she said. "I thought the audit slot was for stakeholders, not surplus store models." Laughter rippled faintly as others nearby overheard. A young marksman glanced at Reagan's rifle case and made a show of pretending to shield his own rifle, drawing a chuckle from the two techs beside him. The social media thread began almost immediately. A post tagged "Arn Thrift Sniper" was uploaded before Reagan finished signing the liability waiver. No one intervened. The jokes stayed just clean enough to be ignored by policy, but sharp enough to draw blood. Reagan said nothing. She handed over her forms, nodded to the marshal, and walked alone toward the observation tent. Inside, the contrast sharpened. Rifle racks gleamed under LED lights. Data screens showed wind shifts in real time. A private locker room door closed softly behind one of the National Reserve shooters, her thermal gloves peeking from a designer duffel bag. Reagan unlatched her own case at a side bench, away from the others. The rifle inside looked like it had lived a life no one else here would understand. Woodstock, frosted scope, no biometric trigger. One of the civilian contractors walked past and did a double take, slowing just enough to mutter, "That thing belongs in a museum." He wasn't joking. She stood straight and adjusted the strap on her glove, then resumed assembling the bolt with practiced motion. Behind her, the main shooting gallery buzzed with elite ritual. One group of shooters discussed optics algorithms while comparing branded gloves. A private rep from a tactical startup adjusted a drone camera to capture one of their team's training runs. No one looked at Reagan again except the ones who thought she was funny. The same female officer from earlier leaned near a younger shooter named Blake and murmured something under her breath. Blake smirked, looked over at Reagan's setup, and raised an eyebrow. "Audit slot's going to be a real highlight today," he said. "I give her 2 shots before she freezes solid." He didn't lower his voice. A tech nearby laughed and clicked a photo from his console. Zoomed in on Reagan's badge. By noon, the cold had deepened. Snow drifted sideways in sheets, stinging the exposed skin on anyone who lingered too long without shelter. Reagan remained outside, adjusting her scope while others ate or watched video reviews. Her gloves, stitched with visible thread, stayed steady on the weapon. Her breath fogged the air like everyone else's, but no one warmed her seat, her name, or her presence. Inside the main tent, the thread was still active. A new post captioned, "Can thrift gear freeze sarcasm?" showed her alone on the ice, her back to the camera, rifle across her knees. The likes climbed quietly. No one asked her name. No one offered advice. They had already decided who she was. And at Snow Ridge, decisions like that were rarely questioned. Cameron Hale called her name with mock ceremony, waving her forward like he was announcing a raffle winner instead of an audit participant. He was young, lean, full of the casual swagger that came with growing up inside high-level ranges. His uniform was crisp and snug under his insulated vest, his boots unscuffed. Reagan followed him onto lane 3. Snow was packed tight under their feet, the air cutting sharp and dry against her cheeks. Cameron pointed to a white bench dusted with frost. "All right, Ms. Brooks, let's start with the basics," he said loud enough for several others to hear. "This is the muzzle. It's the part that sends the bullet forward. And this," he added, holding up a training rifle like he was teaching school children, "is the trigger. We squeeze, not yank. No cowboy moves." A few shooters nearby smirked. One of them snorted and muttered, "Might as well give her a Nerf gun." Reagan nodded once and sat when told, her wool-lined gloves gripping the bench lightly. She made no comment. Cameron continued his lecture, slowly, unnecessarily loud, pausing to ensure nearby shooters could catch his rehearsed explanations. He gestured at the range like a tour guide. "Now, for long-distance accuracy, breathing matters. You want to control your exhale-inhale, pause, squeeze, follow through." Reagan listened without interruption. She made no correction, even as he placed her hands awkwardly on the training rifle's grip. He adjusted her elbow. Then her cheek welled, as though she were a child learning to hold a spoon. His palm pressed down on her shoulder. "Loosen up," he said. "You're too tense. Shooters don't need to look like statues." She exhaled quietly and let him reposition her. No tension. No resistance. A woman 2 benches over leaned toward a fellow competitor and whispered, "Not quietly enough. She looks like she should be prepping lunch trays, not pulling triggers." The man next to her grinned. "Maybe she is. Probably swapped slots with the kitchen staff." He raised his voice. "Hope she signed the waiver. Wouldn't want to be liable if she shoots her own boot." Another shooter called out from behind a scope. $50 says she can't land a round past 50 meters. You hasta Gorn. Make it 75 if she doesn't cry before zeroing in." Laughter followed. Reagan said nothing. She accepted the training rifle back, inspecting it briefly before lowering it to the bench. Cameron grinned, as if satisfied by her compliance. "Let's try dry fire first," he said, "just to get you used to the idea of what a trigger feels like. You know, before we introduce recoil to the equation." Another round of chuckles stirred behind him. Reagan took position and mimed a trigger squeeze. The snap of the pin echoed faintly. She reset her posture, corrected her shoulders herself this time, and tried again. The movement was deliberate, measured. Cameron watched, adjusting his tone. That's better. Still stiff, though. We'll get there. Two younger shooters nearby were filming with their phones. One whispered, "She's going viral already." A third, off to the side, tapped his screen and uploaded a close-up of Reagan's gloves' soft, frayed wool with hand-sewn seams. The caption read, "Civilian cosplay in progress." Another angle showed her rifle case half open on the ground, the old bolt action visible, a cracked leather cheek pad, no cheek riser, and frost-dulled rails. Straight out of 1963, one of them joked. The post gained traction as they watched. Blake Forrester strolled past, raising his brow at the setup. "Is this part of the entertainment package?" he asked, eyes flicking from Reagan to the training rifle. "Because I missed the sign-up form for this performance." Cameron chuckled nervously but said nothing. Reagan didn't move. After another round of forced demonstrations, Cameron gestured toward the bench beside hers. "All right, let's go live," he said. "I'll set the target at 50 meters. Big one. Just aim for the center mass. Don't worry if you miss." She nodded. She reached for her rifle, the scratched woodstock bolt action she'd brought. A few more snickers followed. Someone mumbled, "Hope it still fires in this century." Another called out, "Did you oil that thing with soup stock?" Reagan loaded, slowly, deliberately. Her breath steamed through the cold. Cameron watched her settle. He didn't correct her this time. She rested her cheek against the worn pad, exhaled, and waited. He seemed to sense, without fully realizing it, that something had changed. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "When you're ready?" Reagan didn't answer. Her trigger hand stayed relaxed. Her glove, frayed at the thumb, curled slightly tighter. Behind them, the jokes continued, though they grew quieter. The laughter no longer carried. Phones kept rolling, but one shooter stopped filming halfway through and slowly lowered his camera. Something about her stillness was unsettling. Not hesitant, deliberate, focused. Cameron gave a half smile, still holding on to the performance. "Let's just try to hit paper first," he said again. "That'll be a win." But Reagan was no longer listening to him. Not really. And the range was no longer laughing with the same confidence. Cameron called over the range PA, announcing Reagan's participation as if warming up a crowd before a halftime show. "Lane 3's live," he said, half grinning. "Let's give our guest a chance to show us what she's got." Several heads turned. Blake Forrester paused, mid-adjustment, nodding toward the line. "Let's see the thrift sniper in action," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Phones were out again. One shooter tapped to go live on social media. The stream title read, "Grandma Sniper Challenge, Snow Ridge Edition." Reagan stepped forward and took position. The snow was thinly crusted over the shooting mat, cracking under her boots. The wind pulled strands of her hair loose from beneath her hood, fluttering them against her cheek. She ignored the chatter behind her. The rifle was already loaded, her gloves curled tightly around the grip, soft wool showing worn stitching at the knuckles. Cameron reset the targets, ranging from 50 to 300 meters. The first was a large steel plate. The others tapered smaller, circular, precise. She lay down with the ease of repetition. Her elbows sank into the ice-packed snow. She adjusted the bipod slightly, checked the scope, and pressed her cheek to the pad. A small gust moved across the flags. She didn't ask for correction. She waited. Then she squeezed the trigger. The first shot missed, low and to the left. It pinged off the snowbank beyond the target. Laughter returned like it had just been cued. So much for cold zero. Someone cracked. Cameron walked over, bending at the knee beside her. "Let's fix that up," he said with forced patience. He adjusted her elbow and repositioned her cheek with the back of his glove. "Your support side's rolling too much. Stay square. Just get one on paper. That's the goal." Reagan said nothing. She let him shift her posture, then waited for him to step away. Her breathing slowed. She thumbed the bolt smoothly, chambering another round, and adjusted her position not to match his correction, but to improve it. Her knees shifted, pressing deeper into the snow. The wind moved again. Her hair tickled her jaw. She didn't react. The second shot rang out, sharp and clean. A faint ting echoed back from the steel. Center mass. Cameron gave a small nod. "That's more like it," the stream host muttered. "Luck. Every range has wind ghosts." The third shot struck again, nearly overlapping the last. Reagan's pace didn't shift. Her movement remained unhurried, her hands precise. By the fourth shot, one of the younger contractors behind the cameras lowered his phone slightly. "Okay," he said under his breath. The steel sang again. Not perfect, but close. Reagan adjusted a single click on her scope and exhaled into the cold. Her breath was steady, visible in bursts that matched the rhythm of her firing. The fifth shot landed within a whisper of the bullseye. 3 rounds grouped within an inch, maybe less. The laughter faded. Phones stayed up, but no one was speaking. Cameron leaned forward, no longer smiling. He studied the grouping, checked the spotting screen again, then stepped back as if unsure of what to say. Someone at the back finally broke the silence with a dry, half-joking line. "Beginner's luck?" But the words fell flat. Reagan sat up slowly, ejecting the final casing. It spun once in the snow before settling. Brass against white. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She stood and brushed the snow from her sleeves. The flag near her bench twitched again in the wind, its movement catching the eye of another instructor, one who hadn't laughed earlier, who now watched her breathing pattern with unexpected focus. The demonstration wasn't perfect, but it had shifted something. Not enough to change the rules. Not yet. But enough to fracture the narrative. Enough to make silence grow in the place where mockery had lived. And in that silence, she began cleaning her rifle. The wind had picked up by early afternoon, sweeping fresh snow across the outer lanes. Most shooters had returned to the heated tents, but a knot of observers lingered near Lane 3, still circling Reagan's earlier performance like dogs around something they hadn't expected to move. Connor Yates emerged from the instructor's booth, his face lined from years in cold air, his posture rigid with authority. He stood beside Cameron and scanned the target screen without speaking. Then, he turned to the crowd. "Let's give her a proper challenge," he said. His voice was smooth, but his eyes narrowed with calculation. "The 1,000-meter target. Only one on this range that actually measures skill." Blake gave a low whistle. "That's top shelf, sir. I've seen candidates wash out trying to zero that line." Another shooter laughed softly. "She hits it once and I'll eat my tag." Connor looked directly at Reagan, his expression unreadable. "You up for it?" Cameron hesitated. "That's beyond the scope of her evaluation," he said quickly, glancing between the two of them. "She's not—" Connor raised one brow. "She's not what you saw the grouping." He didn't wait for a reply. Reagan didn't blink. She simply nodded. Then she turned to her gear and knelt beside a frost-dulled case resting beneath the bench. Unlike the military-issued shells stacked nearby, hers was matte black with rounded corners and a leather strap darkened by years of use. She unlatched it quietly. The inside lining was worn blue, felt, weathered but clean. Nested inside was her rifle. It was unlike anything else on the line. Not sleek, not tactical, not branded. The woodstock was darkened by oil and time, hand-carved at the grip. The barrel was cold-forged steel with a faint swirl pattern under the frost. The scope was narrow, compact, set low over the action. Everything about it was designed for function over show. Etched into the left side in small, almost hidden text were the letters Briggs 12C, hand-stamped into the steel. The atmosphere shifted. The silence had weight now. Not awe, but confusion. No one laughed. No one filmed. The sound of the case opening seemed to dull the wind. Cameron stepped forward slowly. "That's yours?" he asked. Reagan nodded once. "You sure it can reach the 1,000?" Blake asked, trying to inject levity. "That thing looks like it survived 2 wars and a garage fire." No one echoed him this time. Reagan moved with quiet precision. She checked the bolt, the chamber, the scope. Each motion was practiced, but not showy, intentional, focused. Connor watched her with arms crossed. Cameron stayed near, no longer offering tips. The target was already lit, one small steel disc centered between 2 snow-covered berms just beyond the rise. 1,000 yards of Arctic air lay between her and it. And now, a dozen people stood watching. At the edge of the range, a figure emerged from the logistics tent. Major Evelyn Grant. Her uniform was clean, her boots sharp, her hair pulled back with practiced efficiency. She didn't speak. She simply stood with her hands in her jacket and watched. Reagan lay prone, bracing into the snow as if it were home. Her coat creaked softly under her arms. Her boots dug into the frozen mat. She adjusted the bipod by feel. No conversation, no commentary, just breath and steel. Blake leaned toward one of the other shooters. "She's stalling. No way that scope even has the range." But Connor's eyes stayed locked on her positioning. Cameron, now silent, flinched slightly as Reagan adjusted the rear rest with a fluid motion. "That's not a factory setup," he said under his breath. "That's hand-fit." The flags along the edge of the range flickered. Reagan took a single breath and moved the bolt forward. The sound was clean and final. 1 round chambered, 1 line open. She settled into place. No audience could have distracted her now. Major Grant took a step forward. Her gaze narrowed on the rifle's stock. "Briggs," she murmured to herself. Her breath was visible in the cold, but she didn't shiver. At that moment, something settled. Even those who had mocked her stood quieter, unsure of what was unfolding. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. But the range, the equipment, even the wind seemed to shift around her presence, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. Reagan Brooks was not putting on a performance. She had simply returned to her element. Reagan's body flattened against the snow, every movement deliberate. The wind cut hard from the right, rolling across the ridgeline with a low, constant moan. She didn't flinch. Her breath came slow and even, each exhale rising in the cold, like a signal. She adjusted her left hand under the stock, nudged the bipod 1/2 inch, and let the final grains of snow settle around the barrel. The 1,000-yard target was a pale disk, nearly swallowed by glare and distance. Just above the shadow line. It didn't look real from this far. Just a whisper of steel balanced against white. Connor stood beside the spotting scope, one hand braced on the tripod, the other tucked into his vest. Cameron said nothing now, just watched, the color fading from his earlier swagger. A few shooters had stepped out of the shelter to watch in silence. Phones hovered uncertainly in the air, their owners unsure if they were recording a joke or a lesson. Reagan chambered the first round. The click was soft, almost inaudible. She paused, eyes fixed on the wind flag twitching near the far edge of the berm. Another breath. Then, her fingers slid onto the trigger. The shot cracked. No dramatics, just the clean, sharp break of a weapon fired in total control. The spotting scope jolted slightly under Connor's hand. His eyes narrowed. "Impact," he said. His voice was low. Dead center. A few murmurs stirred behind him. Major Grant stepped closer to the edge of the line, eyes narrowing. Her boots stopped beside a half-frozen coil of gear rope. Her arms crossed tight against her chest. Reagan didn't shift. She worked the bolt, drew another round into the chamber, and settled again. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the wind. Her cheeks, red from cold, showed no tension, just timing, just control. The second shot fired. It struck less than an inch from the first. Connor exhaled through his nose. He adjusted the dial on the scope, zoomed tighter. "Half an inch, maybe," he said. He didn't look away. Behind him, Blake cleared his throat and said too loudly, "She probably dialed it earlier. Got lucky." No one responded. Reagan's third round was already in the chamber. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. The snow shifted slightly beneath her hips as she dug in, anchoring against recoil. Another pause. Another exhale. The third shot rang out. This one landed directly atop the first. The range went silent. Connor stepped back from the scope like he'd just touched something hot. A younger marksman leaned forward to check the screen and then stepped away again, blinking. Cameron just stared, his lips slightly parted. From the back of the line, a quiet voice broke the silence. "She built that platform," Major Grant said. Heads turned toward her. Grant stepped forward and stopped beside Reagan's bench. Her voice was level, but carried effortlessly in the stillness. "That rifle's Briggs 12C, cold forged, custom channel optic. I've only seen 3 in service, and only one woman I've ever met knew how to tune wind compensation at that range without equipment." Reagan began disassembling her rifle, not looking up. Her hands moved smoothly. She released the bolt, laid it gently across the case's lining, and began wiping down the receiver. Grant continued. "Reagan Brooks, contracted through Dominion Research 8 years ago. Lead engineer for the polar optics platform your entire program trains on. You've all run her software every time you zero past 800 in a crosswind." Someone muttered, "No way." Grant turned toward the doubter. "She wrote the wind drift tables you misquote. Built the system you thought was military issue. That scope, she designed it. You're standing on a range built off her math." The silence this time was different. Not just absence of sound, collapse of belief. A few phones lowered quietly. Others were turned off entirely. Blake stepped back behind the line, his shoulders tight. No one looked at Reagan directly. Connor finally broke the tension, clearing his throat. "I've trained 400 shooters," he said, "and I've never seen a grouping like that on the 1,000. Reagan said nothing. She folded her gloves and placed them inside the case. Cameron's voice came out smaller than before. "You're not military." It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was apology, dressed as confusion. Grant answered for her. "She didn't need to be. She taught the ones who are." The crowd shifted, not outwardly, not in words, but in posture, breath, awareness. The air had changed. The woman in thrifted gear with a frost-worn rifle had pulled off something they hadn't imagined, then quietly confirmed why. Reagan zipped the case, stood, and adjusted the strap. Her breath came out smooth and even in the air. No anger, no joy, just steadiness. The shots still echoed somewhere far off in the valley, but here, at Snow Ridge, everything had gone quiet. The wind softened as the sun began its slow descent behind the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow-packed lanes. The shooting gallery stood mostly still now, its sharp voices replaced by muted footsteps and the quiet rustle of gear being packed away. A few shooters lingered in small, uncertain clusters, their eyes drifting toward Lane 3, where Reagan Brooks had stood only minutes ago. No one laughed. No one spoke above a murmur. The earlier current of arrogance had drained from the range like air from a punctured suit. Connor Yates moved slowly across the ice, his clipboard forgotten under one arm. He approached Reagan near the edge of the prep shelter, where she was stowing her rifle with the same calm care she'd used all day. "We don't see shooting like that out here," he said. "Hell, I don't think we've ever seen shooting like that anywhere." She didn't offer anything in return. He shifted his weight, eyes down. "I mean it," he added, his voice lower. "You were treated poorly. If you'd ever want to return, in an official capacity coaching. Consulting, we'd make space for that." He wasn't offering redemption, just recognition. A beat too late. Reagan nodded once, polite, but unmoved. "Thank you for the access," she said. "Your team's sharp. They'll grow once they stop staring at the wrong targets." Blake Forrester stood a short distance away, pretending to tighten the strap on his rucksack. His face was still and drained. Someone had handed him a protein bar. It remained unopened in his hand. Cameron lingered at the tent's side flap, watching Reagan with a tight jaw and a set of silent questions he didn't know how to ask. None of them approached. She didn't need them to. Major Evelyn Grant stepped forward from the logistics trailer, her boots crunching across the surface. In her hand was a sealed folder bearing the Dominion research crest and a clipped packet of internal forms. "We'd like to formalize your position," she said without ceremony. "Your credentials have already been confirmed. Lead developer, target acquisition, ballistic mapping across 4 polar ranges. The oversight was internal. It won't happen again." Reagan looked up from her case and met her eyes. "I'm not looking for correction," she said. "Only for clarity." Grant inclined her head. "You've got it." She offered the folder, but Reagan didn't take it. "Send it through," she said, evenly. "I'll review it at home." No handshake. No dramatics. Just 2 women standing in a field of wind-scoured snow, history spoken plainly between them. The last of the crowd began to disperse as Reagan fastened her coat and pulled the strap of her rifle case over one shoulder. Behind her, the benches were empty, the metal targets covered again in frost. A few junior shooters stood still, their eyes lowered. One of them had posted the stream earlier. Now he was scrolling through his phone, deleting without prompting. He glanced up only once, then tucked the phone away and turned toward the truck. Reagan stepped out onto the trail that wound along the outer fence. The path was quiet except for the muffled crunch beneath her boots. Her prints formed a single, unbroken trail, each step pressed deep and clear into untouched snow. No one followed. No one dared. The cold was cleaner now, sharper, as if even the wind had grown more careful. As she walked, she passed the flag station where she'd first been measured and dismissed. The fabric still rippled gently in the wind, now half frozen, but still moving just enough to mark the direction. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. At the base of the slope, the last light caught the glass of the Instructor tower, flashing briefly before fading into gray. Above her, the peaks stood layered in white and shadow, their lines sharp against the fading sky. Her breath rose in slow clouds, each exhale steady, silent, true. She paused only once, halfway down the hill, to glance at the range from a distance. It was smaller now, quieter. It had returned to what it was, a place to train, not to judge. Reagan moved on, her posture loose but grounded. This hadn't been about revenge. It hadn't even been about proving them wrong. She had come to shoot, to measure wind, adjust for cold, and hit targets no one else could see clearly. The rest had revealed itself only because they watched, and now they would carry the weight of that knowledge forward, not in shame, but in reflection. Her last footprint pressed into a drift near the trail marker, clean and sharp. Snow fell lightly behind her, drifting across the path she'd made. Not fast enough to erase it, just enough to remind them that not every trail can be followed. Some are made only once, and some never fade. She arrived quiet, overlooked, and dressed in thrifted gear, in a place built for performance and prestige. What they saw was a civilian with a worn rifle and wool gloves. What they missed until it was too late was a woman whose precision had shaped the very standards they trained under. Reagan Brooks never raised her voice, never demanded recognition. She let the truth speak through her hands, her breathing, her shot. And when the silence finally fell, it wasn't shame she left behind. It was clarity. You don't need applause to know your worth. You don't need status to carry strength. Sometimes the most powerful room is the one you walk out of without looking back. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated, only to show what you were truly made of? Share your thoughts below, and follow for more stories that honor quiet strength and undeniable truth.